If you walk into a meeting or a sales meeting, and you only have your agenda in mind,
Right.
then you're not thinking about your customer. And in order to sustain a business, you have to think of your customer. It goes back to the paper route. Don't throw it on the roof. Don't throw it in the shrubs. Get it on their front step. That's where they want it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How to Happen podcast. I'm so happy to have you here, as I always am. And today, I am once again fulfilling my promise to you by bringing you an amazing success story. I've got Jeffrey Madoff with me today. Jeff, thanks for coming. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on, Mike. I'm really interested in hearing who had the amazing success. So I'll be interviewing you, you're saying.
You know what? Here's the thing. You can ask me anything too along the way here. So if it ends up going that way, then that's cool with me as well.
Fair enough.
So let me tell you a little bit about Jeff. Jeff is the founder of Madoff Productions based in New York City. His company collaborates with ad agencies, public relations firms, and directly with clients to produce commercials, branded content, and live streaming events. Jeff began his career as a fashion designer. He was one of the top 10 designers in the United States, then switched careers to film and video production. He edited and directed award-winning commercials, documentaries, and web content around the world for clients such as Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secret, Tiffany, Radio City, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Harvard University, and Weill Cornell Medical College. Jeff also works with private equity firms and investment banks such as Lazard, Financo, MidOcean Partners, and Lincolnshire to produce videos to position and tell the brand story for companies that are being sold, which, by the way, I think is a fantastic idea, having just gone through a sale process with an investment bank that, prepares the SIP, and it's all numbers and it's like boilerplate stuff that tells nothing about the culture of the company or why it's important or whatever. So what you're doing there is that's game-changing idea. That I love that. Jeff authored a book called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas, which is an Amazon bestseller based on the class he developed and teaches at Parsons School of Design in New York City. Jeff is a playwright and theater producer. His play Personality, the Lloyd Price musical, based on the life of rock and roll Hall of Fame legend Lloyd Price, will have its world premiere in February of 22 at the People's Light Theater in Malvern, Pennsylvania. Is that still right, Jeff? February 22, or is it March?
Actually, it's March.
March. Okay. That's what I thought I heard. So March of 22. So Jeff has been a featured speaker on creating a brand and creativity at Wharton School, Princeton University, NYU, Steinhardt, and the list goes on and on and on. He co-hosts an amazing podcast with Dan Sullivan called Anything and Everything, which I find amazingly, I want to talk about it, but I found it just amazingly interesting, Jeff. Jeff graduated with honors from the University of Wisconsin with degrees in philosophy and psychology. He was also on the wrestling team, which combined with his academic studies prepared him for a life in the film business. And that I'm interested to explore that a little bit. You can find out more about Jeff at www.madoffproductions.com, on LinkedIn at bjeffreymadoff, and on Instagram at Madoff Productions. So Jeff,
I guess that's all we have time for
that's
today.
All we have
but
time. Yeah,
thanks so much, Mike, having me on.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Well, I think it's important, to get that out there and all the things you've done, because it's not many people have made the kind of career shifts that you've made, nor the kind of, I think, fabulous impact that you've made either. So I know that was long, but I wanted to get it out there.
No,
but
let's get very kind of you. And it could also mean I have a severe character flaw and can't hold a job. So, that's another part of it. We'll go with the positive aspect.
Yeah, we'll do that. And if we transcend into that part, we'll explore that as well.
Great.
All right. So Jeff, let's get going. I start every show with the same question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Birth, was really the inciting incident.
That is,
and because there was no grand plan, and when I entered into this world, and even as I was growing up, it's not like I had some divine master plan that I was going to pursue. I've always been seduced by ideas. and things that I find engaging or cool or interesting. And I've been fortunate enough to figure out a way to make a living at it. And so, you know, I can't say that I had this plan from the beginning that I was going to do X, Y, and Z, and here's the 5 steps to success,
Right.
because that's not how I lived my life. You know, I've lived my life pursuing the things that I find personally enriching and engaging.
From a young age, even?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I did growing up in Ohio, Akron, Ohio, rubber capital of the world. That's where I get my
Yeah. Good year.
resilience.
Yeah, sure.
I went to Firestone High School.
Oh, you did? Interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, I had the typical jobs growing up, had a paper route. I don't think those exist anymore anywhere in the United States, but I had a paper route. I sold door to door. I worked retail, and my parents had retail stores. So I did get business exposure, and my parents, both mom and dad, were entrepreneurs, as is my sister Janice, an entrepreneur. She has her own retail store. I never wanted to get into retail, but I did through osmosis, just dinner time conversations between my parents, learning about business, you know, about the difference between wholesale and retail, about markup and margins and all those kinds of things. So I did get that education, and that embedded in me so that I had a certain foundation whenever I was trying to do something different, because I believe everything you do informs everything else you do. And if you have your eyes and ears and brain open, that you're able to apply the knowledge that you've gained in one aspect of your life and put that into another aspect of your life. And so I think that the fact that I had that foundation in business, in basic business from my parents, and just growing up in that, I think that helped me a lot in terms of being able to realize business opportunities or create business opportunities and knowing what I needed to do.
And did you, I also had a paper out as a kid growing up. I had a big basket on the front of my bike. I don't know if yours was a walking route or you had a bike as well.
Yeah, it was a walking route, although I would ride
Okay.
my bike to that. And back then, you didn't have to worry about the bike getting swiped. So you could
Yeah.
like leave it for
Leave
a
it there.
while.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was you know, the walking and good fold, good toss,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. That brought back memories because we used to go to, there was one house in the neighborhood where all the papers would get dropped off by the paper company, I guess. And yeah, you pick them up and then you fold them, put them in my basket, take off and throw them, and hopefully throw them on the porch or wherever the person wanted it. Yeah. Cool.
And hopefully the dog doesn't come after
And
you.
after
You know, that was, but you know, the thing about the paper route is it's essentially, when you think about it, you're buying wholesale and you're
right.
selling retail.
Yeah.
And so you've got your market. So you've got your market demographics, which are that neighborhood, the specific houses that are subscribing to the paper, which in those days was just about all of them in that neighborhood. And then you'd have to collect,
Right.
you know, and then you would hope that around the holidays, you'd get a good tip.
Right.
So it was an incentive to not throw the papers in their shrubs or on their roof or anything else. But that's an example of what I mean, is that although that was a job for a kid, it's also a job where you learn that you pay for something and you have to resell it at a higher price in order to survive and make money. And if you do a good job, meaning you deliver on time and you don't throw it someplace that's annoying to your customer, that you're rewarded for that further by many of them by getting a tip.
Yeah. And the collection part's pretty important too for, you know,
Very,
aspiring
very.
business people. You know,
That's
making a
right.
sale is nothing. It's till you've collected the money, right?
That's exactly right.
What were you mentioned door to door selling? What were some of the other things that you did as a kid, Jeff, to earn money?
Well, summer was an opportunity for mowing lawns, so I would start getting my clients in the spring and cut lawns. And, that's how I made money as a young teenager. And then when it would snow, that was a great opportunity because I would go with my neighbor Jimmy and we would shovel snow and we would make, we'd each make 30 to 50 bucks a day,
Big
which
money.
back then was really, good money. And so, again, it was realizing, looking back, that, okay, there's a problem that needs to be solved. They can't drive in their driveway because of the snow.
Sure.
Offer a solution, provide that service, and get paid. And there was no overhead. It was just time, and I didn't even have to buy the snow shovel because we had one from home. So
Just
I could.
use your parents. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Did you ever, little tangent here, but did you ever, like when the streets were snowpacked, did you ever like ride on the back of bumpers of cars? We called it skitching where I grew up, where we'd grab on the back of the bumper and just go for a ride on the snow. Like
Yes, and I remember that term too, the sketching. No, I
Yeah.
never did it.
Okay.
I think I had enough sense to realize this is potentially really dangerous.
Yeah. It's super stupid. Yeah.
And so, I didn't do it, but
Okay.
I am aware of it and saw it. But I thought, this is not a good idea that you fall down and you could go under the car when you fell, and this
Yeah.
can't be good. So I didn't do it.
The dry patches were a real bummer too when they showed
Yeah,
up.
I'll bet.
So you grew up in Akron and you ended up at University of Wisconsin instead of Ohio State, or you went out of state to Wisconsin. What went on with your choice there?
Well, there were a few things that went on with the choice. I did some research into it, and among the state schools, Wisconsin ranked, and still does, near the top.
Right.
But the real story, Mike, is that I was thinking about Wisconsin and Northwestern. Those were the two schools that I was most interested in. I was interested in Northwestern because I had a teacher in 8th grade who was incredibly attractive, and she went there. And I thought, wow, she drove a Porsche. She would give me rides home from school. And I thought, wow, maybe there's one of those my age, and so that's what attracted me to Northwestern.
Oh, I love the decision matrix there, Jeff. That's really,
yeah, it gets either better or worse depending on your point of view. Because so I asked my parents if I could take the car and check out Northwestern and University of Wisconsin. And I get to Evanston, where Northwestern is.
Right.
I don't see anybody. And so finally I see a couple of students walking by, and I roll down the window and say, excuse me, where is everybody? And they said, well, it's finals week and everybody's in studying. So I rolled up the window and continued on to Madison without getting out of the car, and get to Madison. And I was going to be meeting a friend of mine, a girl who had graduated the year before me, who was going there. And I was meeting her behind the student union. So I find my way to the student union, walk through, and you walk out back on the patio, and it overlooks the lake.
The lake, yeah.
And here was the clincher, was my favorite band at the time was the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And they were giving a free concert behind the student union. So I hear this music and I see that it's Paul Butterfield. And I thought, wow, this is cool. And so hearing my favorite band, meeting a girl, entering into a concert, not a tour of the school, with my favorite band,
sure,
the decision was made. That's where I went to school. And so it was a great choice. Madison was a fantastic place to spend those years. a really great, academically, a great school, also a lot of fun, and nothing but pleasant memories, more than pleasant memories of that time. It was great.
And you chose psychology and philosophy, I think is what it was. And
Yes.
was that and the wrestling? So first of all, on the choice for degrees, was that something you entered into college knowing you wanted to do, or was there a time that came along? Like for me, I ended up with an English and a liberal arts degree in English, and mine was sort of that down to the wire, second semester, sophomore year, where they say you have to choose a major. And, I just, sort of picked it out of the hat because I didn't want to do math, and I didn't, I had all these reasons, things I didn't want to do, but I didn't actually know what I did want to do. How about you?
I didn't know what I wanted to major in.
Yeah.
And I took a philosophy class, and the professor, if you were doing from central casting, you're doing a movie and you want a philosophy professor, he wore the tweed sport jacket with the suede elbow patches,
Yeah.
and a really incisive thinker. So, you'd think you'd make a point, and bam, like that, he could change the direction of the discussion and the argument. And it wasn't that there was necessarily right and wrong, but it's how were your critical thinking skills? How did you construct an argument? And I loved it because it made you think, and it made you think in different ways. And so I was so taken by that first class that I took more philosophy classes, and I just devoured the courses. I loved it because it was challenging me to think in different ways that I had never been exposed to before. So I really liked that. And then the same thing with psychology. And by the way, psychology and philosophy used to be cross-listed. They were considered the same discipline until 1932. And
I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah, the interesting footnote to that is that separation happened because Encyclopedia Britannica in 1932 had Sigmund Freud write the entry of psychology. And that's the first time that the disciplines were split apart, because philosophy means study of life. So with psychology, I was really fascinated with, why do people do what they do, think what they think, and make the decisions that they make. And so I found that a really, really interesting area to mine too. So when it came to declaring my major, finally, I had accumulated the most credits in philosophy and psychology, and I always took, pretty heavy credit load. And so I was able to complete a double major in those two things. And I'm really very happy I did. And they have served me well, I think.
How has so that's really interesting, the study of how people think what they think, or or why people think what they think. How has that served you, as you've gone through life? Because I'm always trying to figure out why people think what they think, and I don't have the academic background to know for sure. I only have my own experience and my own thoughts and biases and whatever. But how has it served you?
Well, we all have our own thoughts and biases,
Yeah.
and there isn't an answer. The point is that we are neither as logical as we think we are when we're making decisions, and that there's a lot of factors that figure into how you make decisions. And that became its own separate discipline long after I was out of college, called behavioral economics, that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky actually developed that field. Tversky died, and they don't give Nobel Prizes posthumously. So Kahneman got the Nobel Prize, and they created that field. And it's fascinating. I would recommend, by the way, a great book by Michael Lewis, who I think is a great writer. And he wrote a book called The Undoing Project about Kahneman and Tversky. And it really takes you inside their minds and how they did tests to determine how people made decisions. And so interesting. And then after that, well, actually, long before that, I wish Lewis's book had come out first, but I read Heuristics and Biases, which was their seminal work, Kahneman and Tversky's seminal work.
Okay.
And now, of course, there's a number of people in that field who are doing really interesting work, like Richard Thaler's another one. But I loved, again, thinking about things in ways I had never thought about them before. And that's really opened me up. So the two majors that I had just opened me up to new ways of thinking. And I think the way that it served me well is that I can see patterns in certain things. And I am open-minded enough that I'm not threatened if somebody doesn't agree with me. I don't dig my heels in. I'm interested in why they think that, because I think that's important in business. If you walk into a meeting or a sales meeting and you only have your agenda in mind,
Right.
then you're not thinking about your customer. And in order to sustain a business, you have to think of your customer. It goes back to the paper route. Don't throw it on the roof. Don't throw it in the shrubs. Get it on their front step. That's where they want it. So, these lessons, some of them that seem quite little at the time, become major lessons because the situation may be a lot more complicated. The circumstance may be a lot more complicated, but the message is deliver the product where the client wants it.
Yeah. Okay. Pretty simple. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of stuff is. Most things are more separated by jargon than they are by actual behaviors. And so it did serve me well because I think enter into things maybe a bit more open or curious. And I think curiosity is also an essential part of it for me.
And something that seems like it goes away as you age, and maybe even as you're a kid. Curiosity, you start off with tons of it, right? And then people say, don't do that, be careful, and give you all of these things. And then maybe it starts to fade. But as you get older, it seems like, and maybe this isn't the case for you, but it seems like you really have to work at staying curious, because the world doesn't want you to be curious.
I find curiosity a fuel. It's a fuel for learning.
Yeah.
Because it makes you want to know more about things that you don't know about. So I think that curiosity is absolutely essential. And show me someone who is not curious, and I will show you a really boring person.
Yes.
And,
True.
So I think that having a sense of curiosity, having a sense of humor, and having a sense of empathy are all really important traits. And if you eliminate any of those three, I think it for me diminishes the interest that I have. Except that I sometimes wonder, God, why don't they want to know more? Why don't they want to learn more? And, I'm also a professor, I teach. And so I know, and I say to my students, the first day of class, there are no boring subjects. There are lots of boring teachers. So it's about applying yourself. And, I don't think that you get an education in school. I think you take an education. And education has to be interactive. And that's the way you discover things. And so all of these have to do with following that path of curiosity and allowing your mind to wander so you can wonder about things and question things. So if anything, as I've gotten older, there's so much more that I want to know. There's so much more that I want to read. Because I think you're right. A lot of people just calcify. But I think that these are habits and values that are ingrained quite early. And I had teachers that would say, why you ask so many questions? You're asking too many questions. And fortunately, because of my parents who encouraged that, that didn't dissuade me, so that wasn't going to just shut me up. But I saw a lot of students, my contemporaries, when we were kids, I saw them shutting down. They didn't want to put something out there because they were afraid of being criticized or humiliated by, could be teachers, could be parents, could even be peers. And I've always valued having not only thinking about things, but people who shared in curiosity, even if we don't share the same outlook on life. But, then I'm curious about how they arrived where they did.
Yeah. Right.
And
So
why
it's
did
just-
I arrive where I am?
Right. That's such an interesting perspective, because I get what you're saying. And then I also think to myself internally, how do I sometimes abandon my own curiosity? And one of the ways that I think of is, like, for a long time, and maybe even still today in some respects, I've got this what I call a perfect problem. Like, if I don't think I can do something perfectly or really, really well, Jeff, I'm a little bit I'm a little bit like dragging my heels on getting it out there, because I think that it will reflect poorly upon me if it's not, the super high quality or super good or whatever. And I know that's terrible thinking, and no one should be thinking like that, because perfection is impossible, but I think there's maybe even, at least with me and maybe others, there's sort of a little internal sabotage that can come along and get in your way, just as that can be just as powerful as people, outside people saying you can't do that or you shouldn't do that, or whatever.
Well, I think
that-
those critical voices become internalized.
Yeah. Okay.
And that happens at a very young age. And, you can really discourage people. And by the way, that doesn't mean that those parents or those teachers have malintent. I mean, some of them do. Some of them are just overly concerned with managing the classroom,
Yeah.
or managing the kids in the family. And your peers, you don't know what's happening to them at home and why they might be critical of you. But I've always found that I'm much more interested. I'll give you a quick example.
Sure.
When my kids were graduating from high school, there was a party, with the parents and kids. And I spent all the evening with my kids' friends. I wanted to hear where they were going to school, what they were going to be doing, why are you going to do that, and all that kind of stuff. And one of the parents came up to me and said, "You've been down here all evening, with these kids, why don't you come and talk to us adults?" And I said, because I know your script and they're embarking on a whole new adventure. And I find that a lot more interesting. And which I did. I loved hearing their enthusiasm about where they were going to go to school, what they were going to be studying, the fears they had, the adventure they were looking forward to, and all of that kind of thing. And again, it goes back to the notion of curiosity. If you're not curious about those things that you don't know about, I don't think that makes you a very interesting person. And curiosity and inquisitiveness, I think, makes a person interested because it shows they're engaged.
Yeah.
You show you're engaged by asking questions.
I agree. The most boring conversation is the one that you have with someone who doesn't ask you one thing. They just tell you stuff.
Right.
Right. So when you became a professor, well, first of all, how did you become a professor? And when you first got into the classroom, were you ready, or were you intimidated? How were you feeling when you first started?
Well, I first started as a guest speaker. A gentleman by the name of Dean Stadel, and it's kind of funny. His name is Dean, and he is a professor, a tenured professor at the New School, which Parsons is a part of.
Okay.
And he came up to me after I was directing the Ralph Lauren show. And he said, I'm Dean Stadel from Parsons School of Design. And I said, oh, you're the dean? Oh, no, I'm not the dean. Oh, I said, I thought you said Dean. He said, no, Dean, like Dean Martin, it's my
Yeah.
first name. And at that time, I was one of the first people videoing fashion shows and actually filming fashion shows. And so he asked me if I'd come to his class and talk about what I did. So I did. And I also asked the students a lot of questions. I didn't just stand up there, for an hour and talk. So I showed a bit of my work, talked to them about that, invited them to ask questions. And I ended up getting invited back every semester to do his class. And that went for about, I don't know, 4 years. And he said, there's an opening. I think you ought to apply for it. And I said, well, my schedule is such that sometimes I get a phone call and then I'm out of the country for a week or a month.
Right.
I don't know. I can't do that. And he said, well, why don't you just try it for a third of a semester and, teach for like 4 weeks or 5 weeks, whatever it was. See what you think. What I didn't know is that there was me and 2 other people who were vying for that position.
Oh,
So
it's a competition. Okay.
And I think it was both a competition, but it was also, seeing whether or not you'd like doing it, since none of us were teachers before. But I, also have always kind of considered myself a teacher. I mean, I'm a parent, so that involves some teaching. I direct crews. I do these things that involve engagement in the seeking of more knowledge. And so I didn't look at it as alien. And so I was offered the position. I told them the same concerns I had, and I was hired. And now, as of about 3.5 weeks ago, and started my 14th year. So, I love doing it. It's always different. Like you with your podcasts, I get to invite really interesting people. Hope I'm not a low ebb in your guest roster. And so I'm always learning from those people, and I learn along with the students. Plus, I'm fascinated by how the students view things. And so there's great discussion with the students. So I kind of worked into it, not that I was consciously doing that, but by being in the classroom once a semester and for 2 hours once a semester and doing that, enjoyed it, had been invited to do other public speaking things. And I have fun with it because it's, it's performative, and I think that you can have great information, but if you don't deliver it in a way that's going to engage your audience, it doesn't make any difference because it's not going to land. And now more than ever, there's so many distractions. I mean, you and I didn't grow up going to school looking at our tablets or phones. And so there's
Just
a lot
looking
more
at girls.
Yes.
Like
And
you
there's
said,
there's a lot more competition for attention.
right.
And so I love the teaching, and that's how I got into it. I was fortunate enough that I got offered that position, and then made the most of it. Really that's what led to my book.
And plus there were no fashion reality shows at the, when you were growing up either. I can just imagine what some of the preconceived notions that maybe some of your students come into class with now that you can see all of these, the way it supposedly is. And what do I know? But my wife watches a bunch of those, and I just, I wondered, is that something that influences people that come into your class?
I think people are influenced by all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Some of them quite questionable. And, the thing is with my class, I have, like last week, I had a fashion designer and his business partner. But next week, I have one of the original writers from Saturday Night Live. And we're going to talk about comedy. And then I have a cognitive neuroscientist. Then I have somebody talking about environmental sustainability. And so I
Oh,
go
okay.
into so many different areas. It's very eclectic because I want to show people that there is common ground among all of these fields. And I want to open the students' eyes to potential career opportunities for them and just not only broaden their worldview, it frankly, it broadens mine because I'm bringing in these people and I've had enough people that I find good people through other good people. And so I'm always learning. So it's, to me, it's really a fun way to spend time teaching and learning, and teaching is a fantastic way to learn.
Hmm. I love the way that you bring in all those different disciplines and all those different parts of business, right? Because if you're going to get into fashion or whatever, there's all kinds of components that go into it, just like in every business. And the more knowledgeable you are of the components, the more successful you'll likely be. Uh, and the better, I'd say, the more broad you'd think about things too. You would not be so narrow. In the bio, we mentioned that, the combination of your academic background and wrestling got you prepared for a life in the film business. And I wanted to come back to that because I'd like you to tie that up for us because I don't really understand how that part happened.
Well, part of that was tongue in cheek,
Okay.
but there is a real lesson there that I learned. And in wrestling, and maybe I could have gotten the same thing from playing chess, but in wrestling, you have to think in series. You can't just think about the move you're making now. You have to think about, so what if you hit resistance? How are you going to pivot and make another move? So you always have to be thinking ahead. So wrestling has a great deal to do with strategy. And what do you do when you meet the resistance? Do you fight against the resistance? Or do you try to use that resistance against your opponent? Or do you do something unexpected that breaks that resistance? And so wrestling, was, and there's all these sports metaphors for business and all that. But I did look at it that way. Again, I didn't think of that consciously when I was going through it. Looking back, I saw some lessons that I learned from it that I thought were quite applicable. And one of the main things that's applicable is in wrestling, technique is most important, then conditioning, and down quite a bit, although most people don't realize this if they haven't done it, is strength. If you have technique and you have conditioning, you can beat a much bigger opponent.
Okay.
It's all in weight classes, but I would wrestle against the football players. I would get football players in Madison to train
Very big
with.
humans.
Yeah. So I was wrestling at 123 and I would be against guys that were over 200 pounds who at first laughed at me and said, "Oh man, I don't want to hurt you," and that kind of thing. So you won't hurt me. Well, yeah, and I said, "I'll tell you what, if you're not getting a workout, we'll stop." And because I had technique, I could break them down to the mat. I could keep them down. And wrestling is the second highest caloric burn sport there is. It's absolutely exhausting. And your question is, which is the first most caloric? The chess. Actually, cross-country ski racing.
Cross-country ski racing. Okay.
But anyhow, so, the thing is that there were lessons and metaphors in that, in the wrestling. And so I decided, if nothing else, maybe people find that humorous, but also if I'm asked the question, I actually have an answer, or at least I hope it seemed like I had an answer.
Yeah, it was a good answer. And I like the tongue-in-cheek part of it too. It is a nice combination. So it's kind of funny and it's also real.
Mm-hmm.
It's real. So when you, as I think I remember when I listened to you on Tim Ferriss's show, when you got out of college, you started a business in Madison, or you became part of a business. What was that? How did that get off the ground?
I was working in a small boutique in Madison, and a dear friend of mine that I don't remember not knowing, his mother and my mother grew up together. So we were infants, crawling around together. and he graduated from school a year before me. And, Kenny Meerman is his name. And he called me up and said, "Hey, can you think of a gig that would earn more than bank interest? I've saved up some money." And I was in the store and I knew what sold and I could always draw. And I said, "I'll start a clothing company." And he said, "Okay." And then he sent me what was more money than I had ever had at one time. And memory is hazy. He and I have gone back and forth on this, but maybe it was $2,500. And, that seemed like a lot to me. I realized it was nothing, but that started me on the road. So I had to teach myself fashion design. I didn't know how things were made. I was ignorant, but not stupid. So when I saw fabric on the bolt, I thought it was wholesale because it hadn't been made into anything yet. And being a kid, I had hair then and it was down to my shoulders and drove a motorcycle. A lot of people in business when I was starting out didn't take me seriously because there were not a lot of, startups wasn't a thing then. And so it was, interesting. But that's how I started design. And I established what I think is incredibly important for your audience to understand is the notion of proof of concept. And proof of concept being, does anybody in love with the idea aside from you? And that doesn't count when you include your parents or your friends. Are people going to be willing to pay for what service or product you're offering? So I had some of the seamstresses that would do alterations at the store, put together some of my designs. They sold out right away, made some more, sold out right away. And then I designed a fuller line, had it put together, strapped it on the back of my motorcycle, drove to Chicago from Madison, and went to like 18 boutiques. And I think I sold 14 or 15 of them and had orders. And then I had to figure out, well, how am I going to make this stuff? It's like what we were talking about before we started the podcast.
Right.
Selling is one thing, then you got to deliver and you got to collect the money. So I had to learn a lot, and I was learning as I went because doing it wrong could put me out of business, which isn't to say that I didn't make mistakes, but fortunately the successes were more significant than the mistakes were. And so I was able to survive. And that's how I got into the fashion business. It was not by any kind of, no pun intended, design. It was by accident.
So you started just as someone who could sketch, and you could sketch, design to clothing. Ken gave you $2,500 and you were able to figure the rest of it out. It sounds like, so take it from your notebook to, real. And if I remember the story, you had over 100 employees.
Yeah, pretty quickly.
That's
I did.
amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was other than I was growing a business. So
Right.
I didn't have the time to think about, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I was trying to sell what I was designing, get it manufactured. So a lot of those people that I had were people that were working. My company I took over a factory, ended up taking over 2 factories, and had offices in New York and in Chicago with the merchandise mart. Yeah. And I had, some national salespeople, and, I was learning as I was going. And also, again, it's back to questions. I met people that I asked questions to who were helpful. There were a number of people who weren't, but those who were, and we didn't call it networking back then, but basically that's what it was. It was finding mentors. It was networking. It was finding people you could trust who could help lead you in the right direction, or possibly introduce you to somebody who could help you. So, the fundamentals of business haven't changed. It still requires all that stuff. It's just, it was a different jargon back then.
And at some point you decided that you wanted to move to New York full time? Is that what happened? And you had to make a decision about the business?
That's right. What I found out initially, I liked coming into New York and then going back to my house in Wisconsin.
Okay.
But I really started after I got over the initial intimidation of New York City, because it was very unlike what I grew up with. I loved it. You know, I'm a stimulus junkie. I discovered that about myself. And so I love walking around the city. I love the vibe here. I love the fact that I walk almost everywhere, but, you know, my wife and I can go see a play or a concert at Lincoln Center, have a great dinner, and it's all walking distance from where we live. And, you know, and the people that come to New York, as the song goes, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's
Right.
actually true. You know, if you're in the arts, you want to be in New York. If you're in finance, you want to be in New York. And, you know, which is also a strange marriage, but it's not like Silicon Valley. It's not a one industry location. There are so many things going on here. There's fashion, there's theater, there's music. You know, there are so many things, Wall Street, you know, all of these things that make up this kaleidoscope called New York City. And I just loved being here. So I was faced with the decision of, well, I want to move to New York. And my financial backer had made it clear from the beginning that one of the reasons that he invested in me is because I had to seek financial backing because my company was growing so fast.
Sure.
And, you know, one of the reasons that he was interested in me was I was employing a lot of people and that those people would bank in his bank. And he owned 5 banks in Wisconsin. And he liked the fact that I was providing jobs for Wisconsinites. And he had been clear with me that if I ever moved the business, he wouldn't continue to back me. So for the first couple of years of the business, I hadn't thought of moving here. So that just wasn't an issue. And then we were dealing with a recession. And I wanted to be in New York where people understood the business.
Okay.
And you're hearing the New York Symphony in the background.
Yeah, I hear
That's
that.
what
Yeah.
that's what I call that.
Yeah,
Yes.
very good.
And so I had to make a decision at quite a young age. I think I was 24. You know, do I shut down the business or stay in Wisconsin and keep doing what I'm doing? And my decision was, because I learned another thing I learned at a young age is that money comes and goes, time only goes. And I made the decision that I was going to go to New York. And so if I had to start again, I'd start again. But I wanted to follow where my heart and passion was. And I'm not saying that in a state of blind bliss, by the way. You know, I'm saying that I knew I wanted to change the direction of my life. I wanted to be around more people who were doing more interesting things instead of being kind of a novelty in Wisconsin. And that energy that New York had, that pulse that it had, is something I wanted to be a part of. So I closed the business. We liquidated, and I traveled for about a year all over the place, and then started another company, another clothing company, because I did have a good reputation. My clothes did sell, and built up another business and sold it. And while I was in the process of selling that, met some people and ended up transitioning into the film business.
And this banker that was supporting you, there was no discussion or no way to have you, you know, move to New York and keep, you know, that part of the business up and, you know, running? That seems like something that would be possible. Maybe back then, maybe not. I don't know. But
Well, I think one of the contributing factors was, as I mentioned, there was a recession.
yeah,
So
okay.
there were a lot of stores that went out of business.
Okay.
And he had a lot of other investments. And so we were struggling because there were stores like Bloomingdale's that were taking 120 days to pay.
I
So
see.
normally
Okay.
we sold on net 30 terms, so cash flow became a real issue. And so I think that the combination of, at a difficult time, he could get out and be made pretty much whole when a lot of stuff was, going in a difficult way. And the fact that I wanted to move the business to New York. And, again, he had been clear about that before. Could there have been a way to work that out? I mean, maybe so, but it was time for the next chapter.
Okay.
And I think from
Yeah.
a business point of view, it was, he was happy to minimize a loss and go forward.
Got it. Well, thank you. That helps explain it. Yeah, appreciate that. So, so you sold your second business, started and sold your second business, and you moved into film. Was that something that you'd been thinking about for a long time, or was it one of those
No.
things where an opportunity presented itself and you were like, oh, yeah?
Well, see, in order for an opportunity to present itself, to be considered an opportunity, you have to recognize it first.
Yeah, good point.
So I think that a lot of people just don't recognize opportunities. And they think that things, kind of drop in their lap or they don't happen. And so it's being able to recognize an opportunity and then act on it. So no, I'm consistent. I had no overarching plan, but I love the idea of doing it. And film was very attractive to me because I felt like, first of all, I love stories. I always have. I used to draw comic books that got passed around the school when I was a kid. I wrote a play that was performed when I was in 5th grade in school for the whole school. And I always liked telling stories.
Yeah. Okay.
And I always liked, I always think it's important to look back at, so what did you do that gave you enjoyment? What was fulfilling? And I asked my guests in class, if we would have known you as a kid, is there any indication, we've seen any indication of what you're doing now? And, so when I look back, because I didn't think about it consciously at the time, and by the way, when we look back, it's kind of our, people will say, like, you hear the phrase, it's meant to be. All right, well, I don't believe that at all. Okay. It's not meant to be, but you construct a narrative around it so it seems like it was meant to be. We're great at fooling ourselves and trying to make sense of things that don't really make sense intrinsically. But
yeah, and explaining things with the historical, explaining things today with the knowledge that you didn't have back then, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay.
That's right. That's right. So, so I think that the decisions that I have made in retrospect, some of them make sense, but I also know that, the narrative that I've constructed about my life, that all fits in because, I've always gone towards the things that I found really interesting and wanted to explore, and story is a big thing about that. And doing film, doing commercials, creating the kind of content that I did, big part of that was storytelling and putting together a compelling story. So I love doing that. I enjoyed doing that. Worked with incredibly talented people. I mean, within a few years of being in the business, I was working with Academy Award-winning cinematographers and, great people that I could learn from.
Sure.
And I also felt, wow, this is something that I am only going to get better at. And as I age, I'm not in front of the camera, I'm behind it. And, if you look at many of the great filmmakers, they continued into quite late in life doing the things that they do. And all of that was appealing to me. And so I made that transition. I taught myself how to shoot, how to edit, read books on directing, on editing, on all these things, and literally locked myself in an edit room because I took on a project and taught myself how to edit over the course of a 3-day weekend so I could put together this project to present. And if I'm interested in something, then it's not complicated to me. I can figure it out. If I'm not interested, it's complicated for me to unscrew a jar, you know? So I'm motivated again by the things that interest me and that I feel that I can do and have an impact with it. I find interesting and engaging. I've never been seduced by the deal. Here's a great deal. And,
okay.
you know, and it's honestly, I mean, I work with private equity companies now. I'm doing a project now for, you know, another one, and investment banks who often are the ones that are brokering the sale for a private equity company.
Yep.
And you referenced that in the introduction. And in doing that, it's storytelling. It's interesting to do. I learn about other businesses, and I'm able to do it whether it's a fashion company or an automobile company or a fan company or a national retail chain or artificial intelligence, you know, because the tenets of the storytelling and what a brand is are the same across all these disciplines. So I know how to do that and enjoy doing that. So that's like another area that I started to explore from a business point of view. And I recognized that there was an opportunity. Again, it's not opportunity knocks. You have to be listening. You know, didn't you hear the door knock? No, I didn't hear anything, you know, so yeah, you have to be aware in order to know that there is a possibility for something.
And then you have to open it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's brilliant. But I know I said that at the end, but what you're doing, it's so needed. I think being, you know, having gone through a couple sale processes and also being an investor, you just get tired of the same old, you know, here's the book. Read the book, you know, well, the company's not a book. These people aren't books, you know, there's a bigger story here and it should be told. So I love that you're getting the opportunity to help people tell those stories.
Yeah, I do too. And I enjoy it. I mean, it's fun. And again, it's another area that I can learn about. And so I like that.
Yeah. And you meet amazing people who've created these companies that you've never knew anything about. You know, they fly under the radar, but they're doing great work and they're super successful. And you think, you know, only the people you see on TV are successful. No, that's not true. There are a lot of people who are very successful that you never see on TV. So let's talk about your book for as long as we're talking about storytelling. Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. You said that your professorship.
Visual aids.
Visual aids, there it is. Thank you. These are stories that came out of your work at Parsons. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, what it is it's my narrative, and embedded within that narrative are stories of over 50 amazing people from performance arts, visual arts, entrepreneurs, academics, authors, all kinds of different people who share their journey. And it's interesting. Well, I think it's interesting because they don't all agree with each other. And I didn't filter this based on, so who agrees with my point of view, or I just want to have this point of view on it. I want people to be able to think. So at the end of each chapter, there's questions that you ask yourself. And what ended up being a cool byproduct of the book is I was getting feedback from people that some people those who bought the actual physical book started writing on the page. And then they realized they didn't have enough space, and they started keeping a separate journal of what their reflections were on a particular chapter or on an approach or the decision. If you're faced with this decision or that decision, what would you make and why? What did so-and-so say in that chapter that resonated or didn't resonate with you, and why didn't it or why did it? And then I was getting this feedback that people said I finished, and I had this whole personal journal that now I refer back to, that makes me think about decisions that I've made or decisions that I'm going to make. And, my students are now doing that. And I actually tell them, you don't have to turn this in. We're going to discuss it, but I want this to be your journal. So I don't want you to write for me because you think I'm going to be grading you on it. I want this to be a useful tool for you, so you can make it as personal as you want. And you're not going to be held up to any criticism or anything like that. We'll discuss the ideas, but your journal is your own. It's your diary. So I want it to be useful for you. And I'm hoping that frees them up, so they really do some self-examination to determine a path that is best for them, or understanding why they make the decisions they make, or whatever.
And is that the book you set out to write, Jeff, or did it sort of change or modify along the way?
I knew that it was going to be a book about my class. So what I wanted to do is have it reflect the classroom experience as best I could. But instead of having one guest at a time, I had over 50.
50. Okay.
And I didn't want to make it a book of interviews. So I embedded it in an overarching narrative of my life. And then how these people, here's what I did in this case, and here's what these people did in this case. And, it's unique stories that they each tell. It's not a book of, you're going to hear from this person and this person and this person and this person. There's an overarching story that they all fit into, and
Okay.
talk about the different things that they've experienced.
Okay, got it. So two final things I want to talk to you about, hopefully if you've got time. First is your podcast. Now, I mentioned the one you do with Dan Sullivan. I don't know if you have another one, but that's the one that I've listened to, Anything and Everything. We sort of shared my own sort of podcasting journey before we started recording here, and I'm wondering what yours is, or what you want it to be.
So there's three things. One is, like this, I've been doing a lot of podcasts to promote my book and
Right.
to get that out there, because I think there's a real value in it and I'm proud of it. So that is something that, I started experiencing podcasts from the guest side.
Yep.
Where in my class, I'm kind of in your position. I'm trying to bring out the best in my guest, so there can be lessons learned by my audience, which are the students.
Sure.
I will be launching a podcast because I create all this content in my class, and people have been saying to me, truly for 5 years, why don't you do a podcast? You've already got such great material, because I record all my classes.
Oh.
So I will be doing that, and let you know when that happens.
Okay.
And then Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, approached me and said, so we enjoy talking to each other, which is very true. And he said, why don't we do a podcast? And I said, well, so what would it be about? And he said, anything and everything. And I said, all right, well, that sounds broad enough.
Yeah, sure.
And so Dan and I get together, and, you've heard some of the results of it. And, we do have certain points we try to make, but also wander all over the place. And
Yeah.
I think we've been very true to the name, Anything and Everything, because it includes personal reminiscences,
Yep.
probably revealing more about each of us than any individual podcast does, and talking about things, because, you are who you are, and you do what you do because of who you are and what your upbringing was and what things buffeted you around and that sort of thing. So I tend to ask those kinds of questions, and, Dan and I sometimes look at things in a very similar way. Sometimes we look at things in a very different way. But the greatest thing is that there's just we both share a great deal of curiosity.
Yeah, for sure.
And inquisitiveness. And although some of our opinions may differ, that's actually better for the listener. Sort through stuff. What do you think? You don't have to agree with either one of us. And it's just more about, and we both believe in this too, the exchange of ideas. So we're having a lot of fun doing it. I sometimes wonder, are people going to care about this? Are they going to find it interesting? I'm certainly enjoying the time that Dan and I are spending together and doing it. And I hope it builds a listener base that does too.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting. And the reason for me is two people who are smart, funny, and curious and can talk about a wide range of things. And they don't even know that they're going to be doing that. They don't even know where the conversation is going to lead. That's how real conversations happen in the world, right? You meet up with your friend and you start talking, and you end up talking about something you never thought about when you came in because you were prompted by something the other person said. So I find it, I love those kinds of exchanges, particularly when you have people who can operate in that flow, because that's not a flow that everyone can operate in. Some people are very, they've got to stay in the lane, and you guys don't stay in any lanes. You're all over the road.
Yeah, we're two drunk drivers on the highway.
Kind of. Yes,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Weaving all over the place. That's right.
And so let's finish up with your play. This is the story of Lloyd Price, and I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I met Lloyd Price about 9 years ago. Lloyd Price was a singer-songwriter. He unfortunately died this past May. I would recommend to any of your listeners to Google Lloyd Price, because they probably won't know his name, but they will know his music. And his music has resonated for decades. Lloyd has some particular milestones in that Lloyd was the first teenager to sell over 1 million records. And as a result of that, Lloyd's Black. And as a result of that, at that time, which was the early 50s, his first song was Lawdy Miss Clawdy, recorded in 1952, which has been covered by Elvis, the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen, and about 300 others. If you wanted to buy a record by a Black artist, you had to go to a Black record store. They were called race records. And nobody is prejudiced against green. And so when his song hit, nobody wanted to miss out on that money, because prior to Lloyd, the music business was essentially an adult business and kids weren't buying records. So his life unfolded at the crossroads of the birth of rock and roll, the birth of the youth movement, and the civil rights movement. And so it's an incredible story. And the first thing the Lloyd character says on stage is, my mama wasn't a whore. My daddy didn't leave. I never did drugs, and I didn't learn how to sing in church. I want to get that out of the way up front. So all of the cliches are kind of shattered. Yeah. And Lloyd was an extraordinary guy. He was an entrepreneur. I lost a dear friend in May, and his story, the additional joy and responsibility that I feel is that this play will make his legacy more present and aware to people who don't really know who he is, and the incredible impact he had on popular culture, and particularly in rock and roll. But he also he produced the Rumble in the Jungle and the Thriller in Manila. One of his best friends was Muhammad Ali. This is not in the play, but he got, for better or for worse, Don King into boxing. So Lloyd's story is phenomenal. And the story covers a particular part of his life from his youth up to his fame, and then what happened that changed him next. And I had said to Lloyd, it was hard to do a documentary about him, which I did. And in learning about him, the research that I did to do the documentary, I knew that I wanted to tell his story. And I said to him, I know I can capture your voice, and I know I can tell your story. And then I wrote the first few scenes, and he loved them and said, I want you to do this. And he said to me what was probably the biggest compliment I could get. He said to me after he read the play, said, I don't know if I actually said that, but I sure could have. and I thought that was just really, really cool. And I came to love Lloyd. We became very close. And, I wanted him to be there next to me opening night, which is March 6th of 22.
Right.
He did see the earlier iterations of the show. So I'm grateful for that. But aside from my wife, who will be to my right in the audience, sitting to my left will be Lloyd's wife. And I asked her if she would go with me to opening night. And this has been it's difficult. If I knew how long it took to mount a play, I would have started when I was younger. But on all the creative levels, it's incredibly fulfilling. And it also, I go from here, which is why I've got to jump shortly at noon Eastern time. I have a meeting with my executive producer and general manager, because we're talking about the strategies leading up to what we're going to be doing at People's Light Theater. So that's all kicking in. And, we had to put it off for a year because of COVID.
Sure.
And there's a lot of pent up demand out there and for plays. And I think we have something that I'm very proud of. And I'm working with an extraordinary group of people who are bringing this to life. And I feel I have built a tremendous team, and really grateful for the people that I've been able to get involved in this. And by the way, they didn't come in because of me initially, but good people attract other good people. Right. My director, Sheldon Epps, is a very notable director. People want to work with him. My set designers won 5 Tony Awards. People want to work with him. And again, you build a team through finding good people through other good people. And that's what we've done. So I'm very excited about it. I hope you will come out and see it.
Yeah,
so that's from your stomping grounds, right?
Yeah, March. Yes, it is. I grew up in that area. Spent a lot of my years there. March 6th, 2020. Are tickets on sale now, Jeff?
2022.
2022. Sorry, 2022.
Yes, tickets are on sale now. They actually just went on sale. And if you Google People's Light Theater and you look at their calendar, you'll see the announcements for Personality, the Lloyd Price musical.
Okay.
We haven't even sent that out to our investors yet. As a matter of fact, it's that new.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm glad to be breaking the story here, but yeah, I will definitely go there, and I will get tickets for my family. And
terrific.
I want to see this. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show today. You're the first person to ever answer the "How did it happen?" question with birth as the answer. So I appreciate that new wrinkle to this. It's actually very smart. And it's just been fun talking to you. I love your sense of humor. I love your wisdom, your perspective on life and how things happen. Sorry to throw the name of the podcast in there again, but it's very inspiring, I guess. And your success obviously speaks for itself. So this has been a real treat for me and for the audience. I'm so happy to have had you on the show. How I mentioned your website and all those things at the beginning. Is there any other thing you want to share about how people can connect with you or work with, whatever?
Yeah. Good place to message me or whatever is LinkedIn, as you said. Mm-hmm. But there's also a website, creativecareer.com, and on Instagram at creativecareer.com, the @ symbol. And you'll see clips from my class on there and hear some of the shared knowledge and wisdom from guests that I've had. And that will give you an idea. And my book is available at all fine booksellers. It makes the perfect gift for anyone you've ever met or ever will meet in your life. And, I try to cover as much as possible.
Yeah, why not? Throw a wide net out there.
Right. And you act now and you will throw in the Ginsu knife.
It's awesome. Never need to sharpen it.
Never need to. And if you ever need to cut a shoe in half, you got the right tool.
It's there. Jeff, thank you so much.
Well, Mike, I really enjoyed speaking with you this morning, and thank you. It was a wonderful conversation, and it was a lot of fun. You were a great guide. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.